So one riff that made me as a guitar player, I'll start with one that might be kind of an obvious choice, but I would go with Slayer's South of Heaven. Coming up, learning how to play guitar, playing in bands, being a metalhead teenager, that album in particular was the first Slayer album that I really kind of connected with. Everyone talked about Rain and Blood, and that was cool to me. But on that whole album, really, Slayer slowed down quite a bit. And on that song in particular, it has just this heavy presence of groove, which became a really big influence on my songwriting and my riff writing in particular, is trying to incorporate that element of a really solid, heavy groove, slowed down a little bit, and that kind of pulse. And that's something I still reference to this day. And we've been touring, my band Lamb of God has been touring a lot with Slayer recently. They're doing a farewell tour that we've been included on a lot of. So I hear that song just about every night, and it just reminds me of what a big impact it had on me in terms of coming up with riffs. And to me, it taught me something I still believe, which is, sonically slower is heavier than fast. Fast kind of is a rapid energy, but when things slow down and the time cuts in half and the riff drops, that's the impact that really hits me the hardest. Another riff and song that influenced me quite a bit as a guitar player, and the band in general, but this song in particular, is Jesus Christ Pose by Soundgarden. That era of music, the 90s, is one kind of very close to my heart. It's one of my favorite eras of hard rock music. And I love how Soundgarden, a couple other bands come to mind as well, but Soundgarden kind of had a really good balance between metal and kind of a punk underground sort of ethic and blending those things together. And Jesus Christ Pose in particular, just the riff, the track had this real kind of pulsating, almost hypnotic feel to it. And I thought that was a really powerful effect for a song to be that heavy and still kind of like, dull you into this hypnotic state. Another favorite of mine, riff-wise, would be the Mountain Song by Jane's Addiction. Another 90s reference. It's such an important time of music for me. And Jane's Addiction was just so unique in terms of the way they presented themselves. So many different influences, the kind of tribal drumming, and Dave Navarro always sounded like a metal guitar player to me, and Perry Farrell's unique voice, all of those things coming together. In fact, when I heard System of a Down the first couple of times, they sort of reminded me a lot of how I felt when I first heard Jane's Addiction, but I digress. The Mountain Song was just a really cool groove, really catchy riff, and it just had this feeling of motion, like it just kind of kept you following along the song, and was still heavy and had a great tone to it. Another really important riff for me would be the Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin. I had a conversation earlier about when the birth of heavy metal was, and a lot of people talk about Black Sabbath, and Black Sabbath is huge, but I feel like I could levy a pretty strong argument that the Immigrant Song is also included there in one of the first heavy metal songs. That's a metal song to me, super heavy driving riff, soaring vocal. It's still, as powerful to me today as the first time I heard it. It has a sort of patience to it in terms of letting the riff develop and not being scared to stay in the same place. And that kind of pulse, that kind of, again, same, when I referenced Soundgarden, that sort of like hypnotic pulse, it has a power to it. And so there's a patience to that song and the way it moves and the way it's structured that I think is worth referencing. Another song that had a huge impact on my riff writing and songwriting, and this is probably another obvious choice for people that listen to my band, but would be Master of Puppets by Metallica. And I think because I picked that one largely because so much happens within the course of one song that it just becomes this whole journey in and of itself from start to finish. And for them to be able to showcase all that stylistic ability within the context of a well-written song that you can follow from top to bottom is something that I think any songwriter would aspire to. And for them to be able to do that, relatively early in their career, I think is super admirable. And I don't ever get tired of listening to that song or those riffs.